This article is titled Overview on Deafblindness, written by Barbara Miles. The first section is titled, What is Deafblindness? It may seem that deafblindness refers to a total inability to see or hear. However, in reality, deafblindness is the condition in which the combination of hearing and visual losses in children cause such severe communication and other developmental and educational needs that they cannot be accommodated in special education programs solely for children with deafness or children with blindness or multiple disabilities. Children who are called deafblind are singled out educationally because impairments of sight and hearing require thoughtful and unique educational approaches. In order to ensure that children with this disability have the opportunity to reach their full potential. A person who is deafblind has a unique experience of the world. For people who can see and hear, the world extends outward as far as his or her eyes and ears can reach. For the young child who is deafblind, the world is initially much narrower. If the child is profoundly deaf and totally blind, his or her experience of the world extends only as far as the fingertips can reach. Such children are effectively alone if no one is touching them. Their concepts of the world depend upon what or whom they have had the opportunity to physically contact. If a child who is deafblind has some usable vision and or hearing, as many do, her or his world will be enlarged. Many children called deafblind have enough vision to be able to move about in their environments, recognize familiar people, and see sign language at close distances, and perhaps read large print. Others have sufficient hearing to recognize familiar sounds, understand some speech, or develop speech themselves. The range of sensory impairments, including the term deafblindness, is great. Who is deafblind, and what are the causes of deafblindness? As far as it has been possible to count them, there are over 10,000 children, ages birth to 22 years, in the United States who have been classified as deafblind. It has been estimated that the adult deafblind population numbers 35 to 40,000. The causes of deafblindness are many. Below is a list of many of the possible etiologies of deafblindness. Syndromes. There are three: Down syndrome, Usher syndrome, and trisomy 13. Multiple congenital anomalies. Charge association, fetal alcohol syndrome, hydrocephaly, maternal drug abuse, and microcephaly. There's also prematurity. And congenital prenatal dysfunction, which includes AIDS, rubella, toxoplasmosis, herpes, and syphilis. There are also postnatal causes. Asphyxia, head injury or trauma, stroke, encephalitis, and meningitis. The reason for deafblindness varies. Some people are deafblind from birth. Others may be born deaf or hard of hearing and become blind or visually impaired later in life. Or the reverse may be the case. Still, others may be adventitiously deafblind. That is, they are born with both sight and hearing, but lose some or all of these senses as a result of an accident or illness. Deafblindness is often accompanied by additional disabilities. Causes such as maternal rubella can also affect the heart and brain. Some genetic syndromes or brain injuries that cause deafblindness may also cause cognitive disabilities and or physical disabilities. What are the challenges facing a person who is deafblind? A person who is deafblind must somehow make sense of the world using limited information available to him or her. If the person's sensory disabilities are great, and if people in the environment have not made an effort to order the world for him or her in a way that makes it easier to understand, this challenge may be overwhelming. Behavioral and emotional difficulties often accompany deaf-blindness and are natural outcomes of the child's or adult's inability to understand and communicate. People who can see and hear often take for granted the information that those senses provide. Events such as the approach of another person, an upcoming meal, the decision to go out, a change in routine, are all signaled by sights and sounds that allow a person to prepare for them. A child or adult who misses these cues because of limited sight and or hearing may come to experience the world as an unpredictable and possibly threatening place. To a great extent, persons who are deafblind must depend upon the goodwill and sensitivity of those around them to make their world safe and understandable. A person who is deafblind also faces further the challenge of learning to move about the world as freely and independently as possible. Adult individuals also must eventually find adult living and work situations that allow them to use their talents and abilities in the best way possible. Many adults who are deafblind lead independent or semi independent lives and have productive work and enjoyable social lives. The achievement of such success depends in large upon the education they have received since childhood, and particularly upon the communication with others that they have been able to develop. What are the particular challenges facing family, teachers, and caregivers of a person who is deafblind? We'll first talk about communication. The disability of deafblindness presents unique challenges to families, teachers, and caregivers who must make sure that the person who is deafblind has access to the world beyond the limited reach of his or her eyes, ears, and fingertips. The people in the environment of children or adults who are deafblind must seek to include them, moment by moment, in the flow of life and in the physical environments that surround them. If they do not, the child will be isolated and will not have the opportunity to grow and learn. If they do, the child will be afforded the opportunity to develop to his or her fullest potential. The most important challenge for parents, caregivers, and teachers is to communicate meaningfully with the child who is deafblind. Continual good communication will help foster his or her healthy development. Communication involves much more than mere language. Good communication can best be thought of as conversation. Conversations employ body language and gestures, as well as both signed and spoken words. A conversation with a child who is deafblind can begin with a partner who simply notices what the child is paying attention to at the moment and finds a way to let the child know that his or her interest is shared. This shared interest, once established, can become a topic around which a conversation can be built. Mutual conversational topics are typically established between a parent and a sighted or hearing child making eye contact and gestures such as pointing and nodding, or by exchanges of sounds and facial expressions. Lacking significant amounts of sight and hearing, children who are deafblind will often need to touch in order for them to be sure that their partner shares their focus of attention. The parent or teacher may, for example, touch an interesting object along with the child in a non directive way. Or the mother may imitate a child's movements, allowing the child tactual access to that imitation if necessary. This is the tactual equivalent of the actions of a mother who instinctively imitates her child's babbling sounds. Establishing a mutual interest like this will open up the possibility for conversational interaction. Teachers, parents, siblings, and peers can continue conversations with children who are deafblind by learning to pause after each turn in the interaction to allow time for response. These children frequently have very slow response times. Respecting the child's own timing is crucial to establishing successful interactions. Pausing long enough to allow the child to take another turn in the interaction, then responding to that turn, pausing again, and so on, this back and forth exchange becomes a conversation. Such conversations, repeated consistently, build relationships and become the eventual basis for language learning. As the child who is deafblind becomes comfortable interacting nonverbally with others, she or he becomes ready to receive some form of symbolic communication as part of those interactions. Often it is helpful to accompany the introduction of words, spoken or signed, with the use of simple gestures and or objects which serve as symbols for representations for activities. Doing so may help a child develop the understanding that one thing can stand for another, and will also enable him or her to anticipate events. Think of the many thousands of words and sentences that most children hear before they speak their own first words. A child who is deafblind needs comparable language stimulation, adjusted to his or her ability to receive and make sense of it. Parents, caregivers, and teachers face the challenge of providing an environment rich in language that is meaningful and accessible to the child who is deafblind. Only with such a rich language environment will the child have the opportunity to acquire language for herself or himself. Those around the child can create a rich language environment by continually commenting on the child's own experience using sign language, speech, or whatever symbol system is accessible to the child. These comments are best made during conversational interactions. A teacher or parent may, for example, use gesture or sign language to name the object that he or she and the child are both touching, or name the movement that they share. This naming of objects and actions, done many, many times, may begin to give the child who is deafblind a similar opportunity afforded to the hearing child, that of making meaningful connections between words and the things for which they stand. Principal communication systems for persons who are deafblind are these: touch cues, object symbols, sign language, gestures, picture symbols, and fingerspelling. Also, sign English, braille writing and reading, American Sign Language or ASL, lip reading, speech, Pidgin Sign English or PSE, Tadoma method of speech reading, or large print writing and reading. Along with nonverbal and verbal communications, a child who is deafblind needs a reliable routine of meaningful activities, and some way or ways that this routine can be communicated to her or him. Touch cues, gestures, and use of object symbols are some typical ways in which to let a child who is deafblind know what is about to happen to her or him. Each time before the child is picked up, for example, the caregiver may gently lift his or her arms a bit, then pause, giving the child time to ready herself or himself for being handled. Such consistency will help the child to feel secure and to begin to make the world predictable, thus allowing the child to develop expectations. Children and adults who are deafblind and are able to use symbolic communication may also be more reliant on predictable routine than people who are sighted and hearing. Predictable routine may help to ease the anxiety which is often caused by the lack of sensory information. Orientation and mobility. In addition, the child who is deafblind will need help learning to move about in the world. Without vision or with reduced vision, he or she will only have difficulty navigating, but may also lack the motivation to move outward in the first place. Helping a young child who is deafblind learn to move may begin with a thoughtful attention to the physical space around him or her, crib or other space, so that whatever movements the child instinctively makes are rewarded with interesting stimulation that motivates further movement. Orientation and mobility specialists can help parents and teachers to construct safe and motivating spaces for a young child who is deafblind. In many instances, children who are deafblind may also have additional physical and health problems that limit their ability to move about. Parents and teachers may need to include physical and occupational therapists, vision teachers, health professionals, and orientation and mobility specialists on the team to plan accessible and motivating spaces for these children. Older children or adults who have lost vision can also use help from trained specialists in order to achieve as much confidence and independence as possible in moving about in their world. Individualized education. Education for a child or youth with deafblindness needs to be highly individualized. The limited channels available for learning necessitate organizing a program for each child that will address the child's unique way of learning and his or her own interests. Assessment is crucial at every step of the way. Sensory deficits can easily mislead even experienced educators into underestimating or occasionally overestimating intelligence and constructing inappropriate programs. Helen Keller said, "Blindness separates a person from things, but deafness separates him from people." This potential isolation is one important reason why it is necessary to engage the services of persons familiar with the combination of both blindness and deafness when planning an educational program for a child who is deafblind. Doing so will help a child or youth with these disabilities receive an education which maximizes her or his potential for learning and for meaningful contact with her or his environment. The earlier these services can be obtained, the better for the child. Transition. When a person who is deafblind nears the end of his or her school based education, transition and rehabilitation help will be required to assist in planning, so that as an adult the individual can find suitable work and living situations. Because of the diversity of needs, such services for a person who is deafblind can rarely be provided by a single person or agency. Careful and respectful teamwork is required among specialists and agencies. Concerned with such things as housing, vocational and rehabilitation needs, deafness, blindness, orientation and mobility, medical needs, and mental health. The adult who is deafblind must be central to the transition planning. The individual's goals, directions, interests, and abilities must guide the planning at every step of the way. Guild interpreters, family members, and friends who know the person well can help the adult who is deafblind have the most important voice in planning his or her own future. Inclusion in family. Clearly, the challenges for parents, teachers, and caregivers of children who are deaf are many. Not least among them is the challenge of including the child in the flow of family and community life. Since such a child does not necessarily respond to care in ways we might expect, parents will be particularly challenged in efforts to include her or him. The mother or father of an infant who can see is usually rewarded with smiles and lively eye contact from the child. The parent of a child who is deafblind must look for other subtle rewards. Small hand or body movements, for instance, may be the child's way of expressing pleasure or connection. Parents may also need to change their perceptions regarding typical developmental milestones. They can learn, as many have, to rejoice as fully in the ability of their child who is deafblind to sign a new word, or to feed herself, or to return a greeting, as they do over another child's college scholarship, or success in basketball, or election to class office. Parents, then, may need to shift expectations and perceptions in significant ways. They also need to do the natural grieving that accompanies the birth of a child who is disabled. Teachers and caregivers must also make these perceptual shifts. Parents groups and resources for teachers can provide much needed support for those who live and work with children and adults who are deafblind. Such supports will help foster the mutually rewarding inclusion of children who are deafblind into their families and communities. Summary. Though deafblindness presents many unique challenges to both those who have visual and hearing impairments and to their caregivers and friends, these challenges are by no means insurmountable. Many persons who are deafblind have achieved a quality life that is excellent. The persons who are deafblind who have high quality lives have several things in common. First, they each have, in their own way, come to accept themselves as individuals who have a unique experience of the world and valuable gifts to share. This fundamental acceptance of self can occur regardless of the severity of the particular sensory losses or the challenges that the person has. Second, they have had educational experiences which have helped them maximize their abilities to communicate and function productively. Finally, these happy, involved persons who are deafblind live in families, communities, or social groups that have an attitude of welcoming and acceptance. They have friends, relatives, and coworkers who value their presence as individuals with significant contributions to make to the world around them. For these persons with limited sight and hearing, and for those near them, deaf blindness fosters opportunities for learning and mutual enrichment. Here are resources available for families, caregivers, and teachers of children and adults who are deafblind. You may look these over to see which resources may benefit your deafblind child.